Hey, this Ramon, channel is Alpha 4, and the truth is I've already shot this video and it didn't have any sound. Or at least the audio wasn't very good. You couldn't even hear it even after I boosted all the audio. So I'm doing this video again. That being said, please like, please subscribe, please comment down below. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about Epictetus. We're going to be doing chapters 1.9 through 1.11. And Epictetus opens up with the statement that I am a citizen of the universe. Now this is very simple. Depending on how you look at things, you are a different thing. At the smallest resolution, you are you, an individual. In a slightly higher resolution or lower resolution, you are a member of a family, or you're the member of a neighborhood, or the member of a school, or the member of a town, or part of a county, or a state, or a province, or a nation, or the earth, or maybe you're a citizen of the universe. And in this, after he makes this beautiful and slightly poetic point, he then goes into conversation or dialogue that mirrors the lilies of the field and the birds of the air parable from the gospel. And basically that's that if God provides for the birds and the animals and the plants, of course God will provide for you. Basically, a foreigner can survive where they don't speak the language and they don't know the layout of the land. You, as a native speaker who knows the people and knows the landmarks, can most definitely survive. Then he touches on the problem of suffering, which is similar to the problem of evil. He says that we must think of ourselves not only as a citizen of the universe, but that we must remember that our ultimate origin is God. And to think of it in the same way that if you're related to a celebrity, you think that kind of picks up your status. If you're related to a powerful politician, you think that picks up your status. If you think that one of your ancestors was a great man, like maybe you're related to Shakespeare or Julius Caesar, you think you're amazing. Well, in the same way, when you start feeling bad about yourself, remember that you're a child of God. Very Christian in the ideas being expressed here. Even once you come to that realization, though, you must be patient and wait for God. And that you must treat your life as a military post. That is, that life is a duty. That in this life, when you give in to fear and desire, or when you give out flattery, you are chained down to this mortal coil. The chains that bind you are fear, desire, and flattery. Therefore, it is pointless and foolish to seek to get from another that which you can get from oneself. Think about that. It is pointless and foolish to get from someone else what you can get from yourself. And he reminds you not to overlook your own resources, but to take personal responsibility in everything. Then we get to 110, and in 110 he takes two examples. He takes the philosopher and the politician, and he puts them against each other. He says that the philosopher sleeps in and thinks, while the politician hears petitions and makes decisions. In other words, one thinks while the other one does action. Yet both of these are but games. They're just play acting. It's role playing. See, when you wake up in the morning, let's say you have a family. So when you wake up, you're either the father, the mother, the daughter, or the son. That is a role, or you're the grandparent. That's a role that you play. Then you go, let's say you have school. Then you're a student. Then afterwards, you have a job. And let's say that job is as a TA or as a tutor. So you go, maybe even in the same building and in the same subject, you go from being a student to being a teacher. You go from a subordinate position to an authoritative position in the same class, in the same subject, in the same building, maybe even with the same people, but your role changes. Then, when you get out of work, you then come home. Now, when you're home, you're back to your first role of child or father or mother. And your roles continually change throughout the day. So at what point are you just you? So in order to be you, you must be wide awake and eager in your endeavors. you must be aware of who you are, know yourself and know others. And whatever you choose to do, go into it fully, because that is who you are in that moment. Don't be something you're not. Then we get to 111. And he asks a question. Is what you have done, is what you are doing right now, and is that which you will do in accordance with nature? That is both your own personal nature and the natural nature of the universe and the greater cosmos. But that this question is not what you think it is. The question is not asking, what is it that most or even all do? The question is actually what ought to be, not what is. For cancer is a natural thing. That is part of nature. But if it is malignant and painful, no one would call that good. In the same way, it goes for making mistakes. For the same can be said for making mistakes. As all living creatures that are able to make decisions make mistakes. But that does not change reality and somehow make those mistakes correct. Just because a mistake is natural to make doesn't make that mistake correct. It's still a mistake. And then he comes up with a brilliant formula. And it's very simple. It's brilliant in its simplicity and obviousness, which is where there is ignorance, there is lack of knowledge. And if two opposing and opposite opinions are present, one must be incorrect. But to tell which is which, we must have a set of criterion to measure against. And he tells a beautiful apocryphal story here. The discourse is kind of broken up as a dialogue, but it's not really formatted that way. But you can see the breaks where they're having a conversation. And the story is this. A man, a powerful man, a good man, had a sick daughter. And when his daughter was sick, he had the urge to run away from her and not witness her suffering. And he says this is quite natural for fathers. So Epictetus asks, is it natural? And of course the guy says, well, all fathers do this, or most fathers do this. And Epictetus says, well, that's not really the point. The point is not whether most do it or even all do it. The point is it what ought to be done? And to understand what ought to be done, we have to look at the level of analysis. And at different levels of analysis, something is only good or bad as far as it aids or hinders your current goal. But again, it depends on the level. Remember how this opened up, how this section that we're talking today opened up, which is at one level, you're an individual. At another level, you're a citizen of a cosmos. At some level, you're a citizen of the earth. At some level, you're a citizen of a nation. So you got to ask yourself, what is your motive? And also time frame. So the depth of time, the length of time, and your depth of field, your depth of analysis changes where something is good or bad. This is not an argument for relativity. What this is saying is that depending on your current goal, depending on your level of analysis and the time of span that you're looking at, it can change whether or not you think something is good or bad. So something can be good in the short term but bad in the long term. And something can be bad in the short term, but good in the long term. Which one is your current goal? Something can be good for you, the individual, but bad for your family. What's your current goal? Something could be good for your family, but bad for the city. Good for the city, but bad for the state. Something could be bad for the nation, but good for you, the individual. So you got to ask yourself, what level are you looking at and what time frame? This changes what the criteria are. And your goal also changes the criteria. So if your goal is to die, then anything that helps you live isn't going to help you. If your goal is to lose weight, then sweet tasting food isn't going to help you. Your goal and your criteria and the time frame that you're looking at and what level of analysis you're looking at changes what something is or is not in relation to your morality. But that's not good enough. For you see, even if you figure out the criterion, and even if you figure out what is good and bad based on that criteria, there's a problem of what's the point of even figuring that out? So then you must apply that knowledge, because simply knowing it doesn't actually help you. For knowledge without application is useless, or at least pointless. If you know how to be a doctor, but you don't have a way to be a doctor, what's the point of knowing that? If you can't share it with someone, if you can't use it for something, it's useless. So your knowledge also has to be useful. Even then, we should not look anywhere outside of ourselves for our own motivations. So even if you decide something is good, whether or not that's something you want, you can't look for outside of yourself. You have to figure out for yourself what motivates and drives you. And this goes so far, not just in our good, not just in our virtues, but in our vices. For even if we make an honest mistake, we made that mistake because we chose to, even if we chose wrong. And I have an experience with this where I had a professor who I was talking to after this conversation that I was in, that was being filmed for a kind of a documentary kind of thing. I don't know if it ever made it into the film. I don't know what happened to it. But in this documentary, we were talking about culture in the era that I lived in. And I brought up the Sex Pistols in God Save the Queen, except I called it God Kill the Queen. And about an hour later, when I was thinking about this conversation that I had that's on film, I was real embarrassed. And the professor, a philosophy professor at the time, he was trying to get me into Eckhart, by the way, Master Eckhart. He was like, no, if you made that mistake, it's because you wanted to. Something in your subconscious wanted you to make that mistake. It's not as simple as that. Obviously, there's capacity. But for instance, with math, I used to be really bad at math. When I wanted to pass it, I then studied it and I did well in math. But for most of my life, I didn't care about it, so I never did well. So there's choice involved. And the opinion being expressed here is very Buddhist in his view of attachment and love, whether that view is of the author or of Epictetus actually. Because remember, the author is writing in Epictetus's voice. And basically, Buddhists look at possessions, at physical possessions, as illusions. And even at some level, some Buddhists look at relationships or even other people or even this life as an illusion. And therefore, your attachment to something that is temporary, that is not permanent, something that can be lost, seems foolish to them. And that's kind of what Epictetus is talking about here. So therefore, how you react to something that is not in your control is how you see fit to react. Whether you choose to be brave or cowardly, how you act is based on your choice of action. In Epictetus' opinion, it is not fear of death, exile, distress, or disgrace that causes us, that motivates us to do something or to not do something, but rather it is our judgments and opinions which cause us to choose that which we do. And again, I go back to my math, to my algebra story, which is when I didn't care about algebra, I wouldn't study for it, therefore I didn't do well in those tests. When I cared about it, I studied for it, and I got an A in the class. Or 4.0 in the class, because it was college when I finally cared. But that's the point, is that it's the decisions you make, but it's not just the decision you make now. It's the decision you made a long time ago that's affecting you. I'm going to take Jordan Peterson's example of a car, which is you have a problem with your car, and you don't get it fixed. Well, eventually, even if it's a tiny problem, it'll grow into a big problem. So you could have fixed it a long time ago when you first had that problem. And every time that problem came up, even if the shop that you took it to never noticed it, there are other ways you could have fixed it. You could have chosen back in high school to be an auto shop and have learned auto mechanics. If you didn't have enough money, then in this time frame, later on when your car is having problems, you could have fixed it yourself. See, there are choices you made in the past that are affecting your present. So it's always your personal responsibility. Sometimes you just have to go far enough back to where it is your responsibility. Again, Epictetus sounds very Christian here with this idea that the goal is to act rightly, and that if we do not act rightly, we should cut out or cut off whatever causes us to act incorrectly. Remember his idea about how cancer is evil even though it's natural. And this reminds me of the Christian gospel where it says, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. And then Epictetus says something else that is also very Christian, which is that we should not blame our neighbors or our slaves, our wives or our children, our pets or our transportation for our ills and mistakes. But we should only blame ourselves. and our own judgment, that we should treat things that cause us to stumble like cancer and get rid of it entirely, while we should treat things that help us to do rightly like a prized child or a plant that we care for. That is, that we give it water and we help it grow strong and healthy to the best of our ability. But then he reminds us very strongly that this is not the work of a single hour or of a single day, that this will take time, study, proper examination, and effort to get correct. That's the video. Hopefully this time all the audio was captured. Please like and subscribe. Talk to you all later. Comment down below. Please do a response video. I want to have a conversation. I love you all. This was Stoicism. I'm not acting very stoic right now, but I gotta go. Peace.